Well, let's start there with teams, because the rest of the UCLA transfer haul as it stands right now, you went out and you got a quarterback from Kent State in Colin Schlee. You got one of the. You just rated the MAC basically. It's like, I'll take one of your best quarterbacks. I'll take one of your best running backs, and Carson Steele. You mentioned bringing in Jay Michael. So UCLA's class officially in the 24/7 Sports transfer team rankings checks in at number 7. There's 11 there. What else? What stands out, or what are the big pieces that you like about what Chip Kelly has done in the portal in this offseason?
I just think that if you look at the guys he's gotten, and it's somewhat along the lines of the way that Chip Kelly always kind of approached things for the most part when it comes to recruiting, like even at Oregon, their classes were never incredible. He was just finding guys who fit what he wanted and what he'd like to do. And I think that's basically what he did in the portal. I think Sturdivant, like I just said, is a guy, as far as receivers go, is going to fit perfectly with what he wants to do. I think Carson Steele is a guy that's a lot like Zach Charbonnet and is going to be able to fit a lot of what he wants to do in the run game. I think Schlee gives them a good option if Dante Moore doesn't win that starting job. I think you're still pretty comfortable with Schlee, who does a lot of the things that Chip Kelly likes from his quarterbacks to do. So it's not the kind of transfer class where it's like, wow, they're getting all these former 5-stars and they're taking this guy from there. It's like, oh no, these are guys who are probably just going to be plug and play in Chip Kelly's offense, and it's going to be fine.
So totally agree. Like you go out, you get Kyle Ford as a good possession guy. Sturdivant can be more your deep threat. I like what they got at safety. They still probably need a corner, I would say, for this team, which we'll see if somebody pops in there in the portal. But I also like the linebacker pickup they got from Cal, who's one of their lower rated kids in the class. But he's an 89, so almost a 4-star. I'm going to botch this kid's name, but I know they're very excited about him in Westwood. Oluwafemi Oladejo. I think I nailed it there. They played Cal in the last game of the season. I think that was that rescheduled vid game, right?
Mm-hmm.
He had 18 tackles against them. This is a guy who's kind of newer to football, hasn't played a ton, is really coming into his own. Big body, can be an edge guy for them if they had to, stand up edge type. I totally agree with Tom. Like I have UCLA as one of the best transfer classes out there, and I think they should be mentioned as a Pac-12 contender, just like the other ones should be. Honestly.
Yeah, like the University.
I don't think Robinson's that big of a loss at quarterback either. Like he played poorly down the stretch.
The University of California school system is charging UCLA a Big Ten tax from this point on. So UCLA is saying, okay, well, we're going to give you this money, but we're going to take all your players.
Danny, what team stood out to you?
I'll go Colorado when we talked a little bit about them, but you got a quarterback in Shador coming. You got Travis Hunter, maybe the most talented player. And I think you guys totally hit on the great point about the fact he can go both ways. I think he will. I mean, the way they did it at Jackson State was when necessary. They put him in situationally. I think that might be more frequent than not. And considering Deion liked to get his hands on the ball too, I think he completely understands it. Kavasier Smoke, I saw that name pop up. I had forgotten he's going there as well. I mean, I think we forget how good he was that 2019 season when Kentucky was all the rage. And the sheer number of them, 23 guys coming in. To me, that's what you need. You need a complete overhaul of that roster. So, and I think 9 3-stars, like those are good players that you're getting that are instant upgrades across most of those positions. And I think you've got to be excited. I know it's going to be one of these ones where we're going to get sick of talking about Colorado, but I think when you look at we won't get that sick talking about, but when you look at like grading out, like, coaches, I think you got to give him an A considering who he got. And then you got to go to the transfer portal. I think you have to give him an A considering what he got. Like he's checked a lot of the boxes, which should set them up for success. Now it's just a matter of what does success look like. And we can, talk about that when we get closer to the season.
There's a couple other guys in that class I like too from a pass catching standpoint. So Traore, the tight end they got from Arkansas State, is a pretty good player. Like I was very down on Arkansas State this year, but he was one of the few dudes, along with I forgot the kid's name. They had a corner in Arkansas State who's pretty good too. But the tight end for Deion there at Colorado is nice. And Jimmy Horn from USF is another really nice get for them. Horn has some real juice to him. He'll be a guy that I think will make an NFL roster because of his speed and athleticism. At some point, that offense is going to put speed in space, right? Sean Lewis, former Kent State head coach, is going to run. I assume that veer and shoot stuff that they were running, at Kent State and Tennessee and elsewhere. So I think they've done a really nice job. Now, lines of scrimmage, they
Need work.
it's tough.
Yeah.
Right. They lost Casey Roddick, who was their best offensive lineman, to the Knolls. And they got Savion Washington from Kent State, who I think is a pretty good get. And certainly Sean Lewis has seen him. Right. So I do think that coaches who take players from their former schools, the track record on those guys hitting is really pretty high. So I especially with quarterback, but I think offensive tackle could work as well. But I mean, lines of scrimmage need to be improved there at Colorado, and it's hard to get a lot of impact guys there because everybody wants them, right? There's the playing time thing is one thing when you're getting some of these former Power 5 bounce back types. When you got to go get line of scrimmage guys, that's different. I also think it's notable. I mean, they took what, 21 transfers? How many?
23.
23.
I was going to ask if that's unprecedented.
Yeah, I mean, like Texas State a couple of years ago took a class that was only transfers, but that was in the new coach's first year, like Deion's doing, which is nice because it gives you actually control over the players. These guys can't transfer out again unless they get a waiver or unless they graduate. So it does give you some roster stability in a way there. But it's also notable, like Colorado seems to be changing a lot of things, right? The last staff wasn't allowed to take transfers. Not many, at least. They would submit a large list of guys they wanted, and the school basically told them no. And now they're taking 23. So we may have to reevaluate how serious Colorado is about football in a way that's probably positive for Colorado fans.
Arizona State, by the way, has 26
Mm.
coming in.
They just lack that real
faces.
top-end
Splash.
name grabber. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Kenny Dillingham rebuilding that rock. I mean, to be fair, the state of that locker room, like, probably needs some turnover given the way that things ended with the previous staff. So from here I go again talking about culture. From a culture standpoint, you do need to get a little bit of an infusion of new personalities for sure.
I mean, Drew Pine is their 4th highest rated transfer at Arizona State. So to your point, a lot of it is just like we need warm bodies that have played some college football in this thing because Arizona State did such a bad job recruiting the last 2 years under Herm.
Right. Georgia, we talked about it. We've talked about it a couple of times, obviously, as the 2-time reigning national champions are a popular topic across college football. And this was at one time a Georgia podcast. Whether we have recommitted ourselves to the Bulldogs, TBD. We got a couple of months.
I never left.
Yeah.
Maybe you guys wandered. I never left.
I wavered. I 100% wavered, but I will always have that fond season in my heart. So they took Dominic Lovett, one of the top wide receivers in the SEC from Missouri. They also took Ra Thomas from Mississippi State, the top wide receiver there. Dominic Lovett sure seems more significant now as reports on Monday morning of a domestic violence charge and arrest for Ra Thomas. He was booked into the county jail early Monday morning. I've got no details on the arrest. If his playing time is at all jeopardized, then having Lovett there is significant. Remember, A.D. Mitchell entered the transfer portal late in the cycle and made his commitment to Texas. Yet another Alabama and or Georgia talent making their way to the Longhorns. We'll see how that works out for Mitchell. There's a lot of balls that are available, a lot more catches certainly in that Texas offense with Quinn Ewers and or Arch Manning. But for Georgia, pretty significant that they were willing to go out there and bring in some more pass catchers. I thought that was a good, you don't have many needs on a Georgia football roster. But when you do, you're able to go out and address it. So I thought the Bulldogs did a good job there, especially having Lovett on board if Thomas is in any kind of legal trouble.
100%. I mean, Lovett was the leading receiver in the SEC, at least at the end of the regular season. That's huge. I think that they probably knew that there was a good chance they would lose A.D. Mitchell and Texas, USC being the two main threats there, or so we had thought. Just in the transfer chat. We'll see what happens with Thomas, like you said, the felony false imprisonment or whatever. We'll see. Like, I don't know if Georgia has if you have a felony, you can't play policy, but it also says first offense. So who knows? Maybe that gets pled down or just thrown out. Don't know. But I think there's a larger point here. If you are trying to win the national title, you probably shouldn't have room to take 10 to 12 transfers, right?
Mhm.
Because like that says you have more misses on your roster developmentally than you probably should. Georgia doesn't have room for 10 to 12 transfers. They hit on, like, they sign the very best players out of high school. They develop them. They do a really good job. And then when they occasionally miss, they go to the portal. They took 2 here. They took 0 last year. Would they take 2, I think, the year prior, maybe? I'd have to go back and look. This, to me, tells me how healthy Georgia's roster is, or how healthy Georgia believes its roster is, because they're not taking in a bunch of transfers, because most of the guys in the transfer portal can't play at Georgia. You're doing such a good job that you're like, don't really need this kid. This kid can't play here. They have a different level roster than probably all but 3 or 4 teams out there.
So is it an unhealthy, is it still residual coaching change that you can attribute LSU taking 11 players from the portal in this cycle? Because they were among, it was USC, Ole Miss, and LSU all had in excess of, I think, 15, 16, 17 guys in last year's portal cycle. LSU has 11 commits in its portal class. By the way, it's ranked number 1 in the 24/7, college football team rankings, transfer football team rankings, highest rated prospect along the offensive line. You also built out with the edge with Deshaun Womack. So is LSU an unhealthy roster, or is that still residual from the coaching change with Brian Kelly taking over?
I think a good part of that is residual, right? I mean, like you're also the last 2 years under Orgeron
were a mess.
Right. Yeah. So some of that is going to factor into kids leaving the program and having some low roster numbers. I think the point you made there is really good. Like, I would attack the portal pretty heavily early on in my coaching tenure. If you're still having to do it, in year 5, year 6 and stuff, if you're relying on it every single year, it's a little bit concerning. But LSU's roster is not where Georgia's is. They're just not. Georgia's a different level thing. I'm talking about most of these teams can use the portal effectively. Like the top 5 or so teams in the country, probably not. Not in volume.
If you just compare the situations, it's like, it's not just that Georgia's roster is so good that there's really no room for dudes to want to transfer in, because it's like, well, I probably won't play. I'm not good enough. But it's also just there's stability there. There has been stability on that coaching staff and on that roster for the last however many years. Kirby's been there for a while, and they've just got what they have in place, and it's working. LSU has not been stable at all. So there's going to be that when you're churning your coaching staff, you're going to be churning the roster now too, especially because just with the transfer portal, with guys not having to sit out a year, this is just commonplace. And I think that the roster had talent when Brian Kelly got there, but it was a lot of guys leaving, a lot of guys coming in. Brian Kelly's got to bring in players that are fitting what he wants to do compared to what the players were doing. And I think if you look at the talent LSU's brought in, he's upgrading the talent level. Like last year's team, I think overperformed what it was. And that's a good sign going forward for Brian Kelly as a coach, who I think has been one of the more underrated coaches in the country for a while now. He's bringing in more talent. Like, I don't think LSU is going to be winning the SEC next year, but I think LSU is going to be better next year than it was this year, and it was pretty good this year.
You got to consider too, it's not just about talent, who has the most 4 or 5 stars, guy who has the highest rated. A lot of it's about fit and personality and getting, hey, like especially when you're dealing with coach and turnover. Like, I'm sure there's players that at LSU were like, well, let me see what Brian Kelly's going to be like. And some of them bought in, and some of them are like, this isn't for me. This isn't what I signed up for. So there's going to be a process of kind of weeding and sifting through the guys that really want to be there and the guys that don't. And now you get to go out there and you get to sell the transfers, the guys that are coming in on, hey, this is what I am. This is what I'm going to be. And are you buying in or not?